Final. J. Sam Jones here with you. Joe Patrick, 929 The Game, and other places is over there. Joe, why is it Atlanta United's fault specifically that a group of MLSD players went down to a one-off game and lost after the goalkeeper threw the ball or kicked the ball into another dude's leg and back into the goal?
This story is insane. You know, one of our writers, Greg Outer, who writes for us, does a lot of Atlanta United 2 stuff, youth stuff, brought this up after the game, after they failed qualification, saying that somebody's going to bring it up that it's Atlanta's fault.
I'm so sorry because I immediately went, great. Literally no one's that stupid.
I was kind of with you too. I was like, nah, that can't possibly happen. And then of course it's like, honestly, the most surprising thing was the source that it came from. Doug McIntyre, who's normally a really kind of just straight line, not an emotional kind of tweeter or reporter, just went off.
And to be fair, there is a hint of trolling in this. Like, obviously, he was like, pull all three goalkeepers, but the sentiment seemed very real that he felt there should be some kind of retaliation. And at some point, Atlanta United was at fault for this instance, which, like, I'm not sure really how much Miles Robinson and George Bello stop what happened from happening. I think if you hop in the time machine to like Terminator this, right? Like, you go back and kill the Jason Christ, whatever, signing in the first place, right? You don't go like take down Atlanta United. You go stop a whole bunch of other things that were the issue here.
For sure. And there were some missed chances in the game too. You know, like there's lots of reasons. And when you set an objective to make the Olympics, you have that objective. Like they weren't going to say when they didn't get Miles Robinson and George Bello in the squad, it's not like they were like, okay, well, maybe qualifying for the Olympics is a bridge too far for us without these guys, you know?
Right. Which I really don't want to get into it too much. I just wanted to start the show to make sure
it was kind of hilarious.
We were clear on what side we were on with this. The rest of the stuff bores me to death, to be totally honest.
Sure.
So
totally
we'll move on to some stuff that's a little more interesting. First and foremost, thank you to Kurt Castle for the intro there.
Thank you, Kurt.
Going back a couple minutes. Good work, Kurt.
Only Sam is allowed to say your name now on the podcast after I totally butchered it the other day.
That's Kurt Castle. His song is Chances. We appreciate him letting us use it for our intro. Moving on some housekeeping things, though. You guys can go check out some of the excellent stuff. We are excellent, in my opinion, excellent in most other people's opinions so far. We haven't had too many complaints. We're up near 100 patrons at this point already, which is just absurd. We appreciate you all going ahead and checking that out. Had a few more people come in this week because we had a very big interview up with the captain, Michael Parkhurst, back for round 2 on that one. Go check that out. He had a lot of insights and that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Joe, yes.
Well, I just want to say, again, thank you to everybody who has signed up so far. It's just, I've talked about it before in this podcast, but I just can't say it enough, like how amazing the little community that it is that's building. And it's just great to see. We've got people already now talking about, swapping tickets or putting tickets up for people who can't go to games in there in our little group. So it's really cool. It's good to be a part of. And I would encourage anybody who wants to hear these interviews and just kind of be part of this to sign up. I think it would definitely be worth the little bit of money it is to kind of join this community where there's just a lot of love for Atlanta United and everything that's going on. It's great.
It's cool to see that. It's cool to see people maybe being like, hey, do you guys go to any tailgates? Maybe meet up with folks at that once we're able to do that a little bit more. And it's getting close. It's getting close, Joe Patrick. We're only a week away, but keep an eye out for that. We have daily shows coming out as well that aren't quite daily, but are like semi-daily that'll have quotes from people in the organization. The latest is with Gabriel Heinze, and we'll talk about his presser in just a little bit.
And one other thing, I haven't even talked to you about this, Sam, but I'm going to be talking to Josh Bagriansky after the game next week against Alajuelense, so we can do a little bit of tactics talk before we get into that. Will air sometime for patrons before the regular season gets started. That'll just be a little freebie on top of other stuff we've got in the works, like you mentioned. And I think we have maybe some secret guests, hopefully, that will come on the show. But there will be lots of stuff to talk about here soon, especially once these games get going.
Yeah, the interviews are going to keep coming, and we're excited about the next few ones. If things break our way, we always need some things to break our way, but they almost exclusively have at this point. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out. And you guys should keep an eye out too. Look out. What's that? Oh God, no, it's business time. I'm not singing this week.
It's business. It's business time.
Yeah.
I took over today.
That
That's
was
my little
nice.
falsetto.
That was on pitch and everything. I dug that. I dug that. Hot, Joe Patrick. Other hot news, though, Atlanta United gets vaccinated. Isn't that a good transition? Atlanta United gets vaccinated for the first time. That news dropped yesterday. They were, of course, they looked like MBS. They were at MBS, right? They went to do that.
Yeah, I was at the Max vaccination site at Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
You can get vaccinated too. I don't know if you guys knew this yet. All adults over 16 eligible in Georgia now. I have my second dose scheduled to be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's kind of cool for me. The last place I went before the pandemic started, that was like a thing, was Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and now I'm getting the end of my pandemic at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I like that a lot. I wish it didn't have to happen. Seems like a dumb thing. I don't like this arc, but I'm in this arc. I'm gonna appreciate it for what it is, I guess.
Question for you: were you when you got your first vaccine dose? Were you like emotional at all? Or anything? I kind of was. I didn't think I would be. Because I wouldn't think I would be because I contracted COVID, so I'd already I've had the relief already of feeling like I'm pretty safe from just the immunity of having had it in December. But still, it was just like kind of like a timestamp of like a year on. It was kind of didn't expect that coming.
It's something that I won't forget, and I think the second one at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the aforementioned reasons is going to be really one of those things where I will be emotional with it and everything like that. You can do it too.
Yeah.
Go get signed up. Go get signed up, guys. If you need help getting signed up, we'll help you get
signed up.
Free.
It's not. Yeah. It's yeah.
We're almost there. We're almost there. Only a week away, Joe Patrick, our next game. We have a game to preview at some point in this conversation. Before we do that,
God help us.
God help us. Tough draw. We do want to talk about the interview we had with Michael Parkhurst. Obviously, you can listen to that if you're a patron, like we said. But if you haven't, we do want to kind of go into some of the stuff that he said. And Joe, there were a lot of really interesting things that stood out.
Yeah.
For you, what kind of stood out from our talk with Captain?
Probably that his favorite item at Chili's is the fajitas.
To quote Michael Parkhurst, do they have fajitas? Question mark.
Of course they do.
Yes,
of course
Michael.
They do.
Yes. My biggest takeaway, I think, and maybe yours too, which we'll get to a little bit, I guess, but the story about Tata writing on the TVs and whiteboards with a Sharpie, stuff that will not come off. We asked him if this had ever happened once. He said no. It happened multiple times.
Yeah. And on the road too. That was
it was excellent. It was excellent. There's also a lot of interesting stuff I thought as well about some of the culture divide.
That's what I thought.
Some of the South American players, and of course Frank de Boer comes in and changes everything. My thought with that is you can have culture changes, you can get people to respond to that as long as you are a person who can manage people. And I clearly seemed like that was not the case with this group. And something interesting Parky said was that they had, by the end, lost a love of coaching, it seemed like, which makes the Netherlands thing even more insane to me. Like, what was that job interview like? I'm just not feeling this. I'm kind of bad at it. Do you want the job? Weird connections there for the Netherlands. But
I mean, I didn't want to say this during the interview because I didn't want to try to like put words in his mouth as to what was going on or anything. But, obviously we kind of know the storyline, and he did hint at this around that Houston game where Houston had the early red card and they went 3-5. They were going 3-5-2 in that game because they had a rash of injuries. And of course, the 3-5-2 by the formation's less important as opposed to just like the general mentality of the team. And they really, that was kind of the inflection point where they started going back and kind of playing in that old style that they did under Tata. And I do wonder if because of that, like when Parkhurst talks about kind of losing the love for coaching or whatever, if it's like, just being disappointed that the team is now kind of coaching themselves and doing better, and there's not really anything that you can do to kind of put your stamp on it so much. So I mean, we've heard many reports and stories about Joseph Martinez kind of being the coach, about LGP kind of being the coach and taking the reins,
not wanting to be there at all.
So
walking off the field at times.
I think that a lot of what Parkhurst said in that interview kind of does back up and just gives us a little bit more color, a little bit more context to what we kind of understood what was happening during that season.
Go check that out.
I also thought it was interesting the way he talked about just adapting to Tata. Also, I thought his insights into Tata was good too. And again, it's kind of things we've heard, but it's always good to hear them directly from the players talking about how a lot of the domestic guys, a lot of the American-based guys had to adjust to essentially like a Spanish language club, essentially, as far as from a player standpoint, when you're on the field and in the locker room. I almost call it a clubhouse baseball season. Just adapting to that. And I think when you're talking about an MLS team in MLS, you think that it's the other way, that foreign players coming into the league have to adapt to the American way that things are. But really it was the Latin culture was so dominant inside this club. And I think that was partially led by Tata and partially by this collection of players that were so important to the team. Just interesting to hear the standpoint of Michael Parkhurst as a guy who's been around the league, having to kind of adjust to that situation.
Those guys did adjust, though. And I think a large part has to do with that because Tata was someone who could bring that out of you, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've maybe touched on that enough at this point, but you get the point. Go check that out. It's a good about 30-minute interview with Parky. We enjoy having him coming on. He seems to not hate it entirely, which is great. He keeps coming back, so seems good to us. Someone we haven't gotten to, someone we've seen literally as much as we've seen Parky is Gabriel Heinze. We've had 2 press conferences now with Heinze, and the second one came just a little bit ago. I believe it was on Saturday, right before they went to Birmingham for a scrimmage. We didn't really talk about that. But we did get to talk to him. He had his translator with him as assistant coach. Pedro Matia Yevis, I believe is his name. Did a really good job kind of translating for him, and Justin Feldheis was there as well to help out with that. But Joe, largely close to the vest, I think. I think he was very direct on a lot of things, not blunt, not like transgressive about anything, not angry, just direct, right? Very, very short to the point, except for when he gets to talk about his overall philosophy and general feelings on coaching and managing people. That's when he seems to be at his most Ted Lasso-iest, I think is how I would put it. And also maybe his most Bielsa-iest.
Yeah.
When he talks about preparation, everything like that, he has a little bit of that. And then he moves into this, like, I want them to become leaders off the field. Kind of thing,
right. Yeah. Grows people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely not as interested in answering a question about, like, what is George Bellows' ceiling? Like those kinds of questions that are very media-ish and we all want to hear about. He overall, he struck me as just very uncomfortable in that setting. I think part of it is doing it on Zoom, doing it through foreign languages. It is uncomfortable. Like it is uncomfortable for everybody involved doing these things. So definitely appreciate him, even just doing that for us the day before that game. Definitely looked like he was jonesing for a cigarette by the end there. I think that he was lighting one up shortly after. I don't know. He does have a raspy voice. I assume he's a European, like a dainty
Where are we going?
Cigarette smoker. I don't know. I'm just giving my impressions of the interview. I thought it was I don't know. It wasn't super insightful apart from the things that you mentioned.
Exactly. And again, we got a daily up on the Patreon about that.
And we got we did get some news out of him about Alan Franco, who I think
we got a couple of different news little items here, but obviously the big one being Alan Franco. He just kind of casually dropped in the middle of, I can't even remember what the question was exactly, but he's like, we've been going after a center back. It's Alan Franco. He got signed last week. It was just said like that. I was like, oh, okay. Some later reporting from Felipe Cardenas indicates that perhaps he spoke out of turn, which he did anyway. That announcement had not been made at any point yet. So he was maybe jumping the gun a little bit and maybe jumping the gun still on some final details, most importantly, that still need to be sorted out.
Yeah. And Darren Eales also said this. Darren Eales spoke in a kind of behind closed doors, though virtual season ticket holder town hall last night. And he also was specified that the deal is not done until you see the cryptic tweet, I think was his words. So just FYI. But I think it's
just imagine Darren just not being upset that he mentioned it, just being upset that he didn't get to do the cryptic tweet potentially.
Yeah.
Right? Darren, you got this, man. You got this. And we eagerly await it. Some other news kind of dropped in that. Mateus Osatu did pick up a knock in training a couple weeks ago, but that is not the reason he's been missing, apparently. He has traveled down to Brazil for personal reasons. We wish Matias the best with regards to that. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it will be interesting to see what happens with Rossetto. I hope that, the personal reasons are nothing that's super like serious or tragic or anything that's happening with his family, because the COVID situation down there in Brazil is pretty bad by all accounts. And, speaking of that, I think it will make it even that much harder, that much longer for whenever he is or would possibly be ready to come back to the team, for him to get all of that arranged coming back from a place where COVID has been so bad. I don't know if it's tougher for people to come back from countries like that, just in terms of getting across the border and re-entering the United States. I don't know if they have to wait a certain amount of time or anything like that, but hopefully everything's okay. But maybe there is also, I hate to kind of pivot straight to the implications on the field or on the roster for Atlanta United, but there is an international slot situation where the team does still appear to be over the international slot limit by one, and this deadline for that would be coming before the MLS season starts. Was it April 16th or 15th? 13th, something like that, middle of April. 16th. So not I knew it was one of those. I got one of them. Yeah, so not that much time left to sort that out, and you wonder, he is an international player. You wonder if that may be a factor here.
In other news, the schedule release. Did we talk about we were talking about perhaps maybe the schedule being released the last time we did a full show?
Yeah, we were thinking that it may be released while we were on the air, but I think it came on. I think it was released just afterward. Yeah,
just after that. So the schedule is out officially. You can go check that out. Of course, pretty much anywhere. You can just Google Atlanta United. The full schedule will pop up. Some interesting kind of tweaks that MLS has done this year. Most notably, I think, is only 2 Western Conference teams. Those games will come against Seattle and LAFC, which if you were going to draw 2 Western Conference teams, I mean, those are probably the 2 you'd want to see just for notoriety purposes, maybe not for standings purposes, especially LAFC. Seattle's probably going to take a step back this year, but who knows? By the summer, they may have all their guys in again. That's typical Seattle things. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see. Some other things to kind of note with that. They're basically in a region with several other teams. These teams will play Atlanta United 3 times. Those teams, off the top of my head: Nashville, Toronto, Montreal, Orlando, Cincinnati.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
One of those. Miami, excuse me.
Miami. Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Miami and Cincinnati. Yep, there we go. Of course, Toronto and Montreal, you're like, why are they in our region? Well, they're starting out in Florida due to pandemic-related things. So that explains that. And yeah, that's kind of how it all shakes out for Atlanta United. There are a couple interesting things there, I think. Getting Orlando 3 times is interesting. Getting Toronto especially 3 times is interesting. We've really not seen a ton of them. It always seems to come at crucial moments, though, for Atlanta United, and it seems to be that same way this year. We faced Toronto late in the year. Could be a really interesting one. Could see Chris Armas blow it. Toronto's fascinating to me. Toronto's just fascinating to me.
I think overall, just looking broadly at this schedule, I think it'll be a good kind of mix between what a normal schedule would be and what we saw last year, where last year it was kind of, last year just sucked overall from LA United's perspective. But I can imagine it would have been cool if your team was like in contention for the playoffs and you're playing lots of big games against teams. You're kind of developing that rivalry in the season. I feel like it's kind of going to be like that this year, where you do see, teams like Toronto and Orlando more often than you might otherwise. So you can develop some of those rivalries, especially if it's 2 teams that are really fighting for spots in the playoffs. But it will be disappointing not to just see them play some of these teams in the West Coast. They don't play as often, but what can you do?
I have some thoughts about this. There's a question about it later, though, and we'll touch on it then. I have some thoughts. If you already read the newsletter, the daily kickoff for MLSsoccer.com. Those first three games have suddenly become very, very important in that schedule out of nowhere. I described it today as like when you're playing a game in the yard with your friends and you just made up the game, right? And you're inventing rules on the fly for this game as like a kid. That is kind of what happened here.
Yes.
With the Open Cup.
You're drawing brackets with like pine bark on the concrete.
Exactly. So what has happened with the Open Cup is they are only going to take 8 teams from the first division, right? That is MLS. Only going to take those 8 teams, and they're going to base it on the standings after the first 3 weeks of the season. That's not the first 3 games for every team. That's the first 3 weeks. So you have a couple of teams like Columbus, for one, who are only playing 2 games. Toronto is another one of those teams, only playing 2 games. The rest of the teams are playing 3 games. They'll take a points per game basis at that point and decide the top 8 teams, which then goes into this hilarious list of like, it is a tome of tiebreakers. They might get to F on it, A through all the way to like G on this thing. It's pretty wild. So keep an eye out for that. We have some more questions about that later. We'll get into more about what that means for Atlanta United, but it certainly means a lot of interesting things for MLS.
Yeah, I've got nothing else to add. I just generally prefer them just picking Atlanta United to just make the CONCACAF Champions League. That's much easier. But
my conspiracy addled brain tells me that they got so much flack for just doing that for Champions League. They didn't want to just do it again. And they didn't want to get roasted for like any decisions they made on who gets in. So they just said, first 3 weeks of the season, cool. I love it. I think it's going to be super entertaining to have this first 3 games matter to some extent, right?
Yeah, it does make those games more interesting. They talk about early in season. It seems like teams can sleepwalk through in various leagues, not just in soccer, but in various leagues. It feels like those early games in the season aren't as important. But yeah, it certainly does put more on these.
It's a one-time deal. Of course, obviously the Open Cup is about bringing all 120 something teams on the U.S. soccer ladder into the competition, but kind of lame. I don't know. I kind of wish it was just kind of a normal thing and maybe even extended like the first like 10 games or something like that, just to make this a little more important in the future. It won't stick, but enjoy it while you can for this. Enjoy the next few days, I guess, if you can, without Atlanta United playing actual meaningful soccer. Joe Patrick, we are again a week away from a tough draw.
Alajuelense. I'm getting better at it. I don't know if you noticed this in our show sheet the other day. I actually had to spell it out phonetically, so I could say it properly. But I'm getting better.
I did notice.
So we kind of, as far as previewing this game, I think are we going to talk about who might play later in the questions about that? Okay, so we'll talk about that later. But I think just generally speaking, I'm more anticipating something along the lines of the CONCACAF Champions League tie that was played in Frank de Boer's first season when the team, I can't remember the name of the team. I don't think it was Motagua. I think that was the second year, but it was the first year they went down there and got stomped. Yeah, like 3-0, and they looked terrible. I'm kind of expecting more of that kind of situation where they could go down there, look bad. I don't know if they're going to lose 3-0, but I could totally see them going down there and it looking rough. But then coming back and having a clear advantage in the second leg, which I think is just a huge advantage in these ties, having the second leg at home, just in terms of having that comfortability and knowing what the score line is at when you go into that second game in your own territory. So that's kind of what I'm expecting.
As far as that home game goes, we do want to tell y'all that there is a plan for limited capacity for that for fans. We just got our media credential application going as well. We'll be like off in tents somewhere and not even allowed to speak to the players in the locker room after the game. I'm still going to go. I miss soccer. But what we can really tell you about this is that Alajuelense has not lost since November.
Oh, is that real?
That's real. That was not a bit. They have not lost since November. And since like October, they've maybe lost one time, right? So this is a team that at the very least knows how to win. This is a team that's obviously good. It's obviously talented enough to get into the Champions League. And they're going to have that kind of mentality coming into this. They're going to have a us against the world kind of giant killing mentality with this. But looking up and down the roster at the same time, this is an obstacle that Atlanta United should get past based on talent. There are a lot of difficulties here. Obviously, there are a lot of roadblocks to doing that. Don't be surprised if they lose. Just know that they should win.
If Alajuelense had a player like Lisandro Lopez on their team, the talking point going into this game would be, you got to watch out for Alajuelense. They've got Lisandro Lopez he's a former European golden boy. And Atlanta United has that guy. So you're right. Like when you look at the rosters, I mean, we talk about, oh yeah, Alajuelense has is it Brian Ruiz?
Yes.
Yeah, Atlanta United has those kinds of players too. Those kinds of players who have had a ton of success in Europe, who have had success obviously here on the continent. So when you look at the roster, it's not really, honestly, it's not close. But there's the form and all that stuff. Just the fact that Atlanta United hasn't played games yet under this new manager in a new style. So that's really, I think, what this is going to come down to.
Exactly. It's the form, it's the cohesiveness. Up and down the lineup, though, it's a bunch of domestic guys for this Costa Rican team. Just that the talent level isn't quite the same as Atlanta's international pool of players. Again, don't be surprised I lose, but know that they probably should be able to advance. I think like Joe said, I think you do kind of want to keep an eye out for form. I don't think they're going to go down and look necessarily scared or anything. That Frank team in that first game looked so tepid, just completely discombobulated.
Was that their first ever CONCACAF Champions League game? I don't think they played in CONCACAF Champions League under Tata because they qualified by winning MLS Cup.
That's right. Yeah.
So they hadn't really experienced that before.
Exactly. But I expect a little more cohesion from this team. That's just my feelings. Just based on what we know about what's been drilled into them in the preseason, how the process has worked, they should at least look a little more competent. Again, I don't think they're going to win, but
yeah, that's where I'm at. Yeah. I'm just expecting not a great result there, but I think Atlanta United still wins this tie overall.
That game is on Tuesday. It's on April 6th. I believe the start time kickoff there is set for around 8 p.m. Eastern. Keep an eye out for it. Keep an eye out for this quick break. Wow, what a break. What a momentous moment in break history. Maybe the greatest break. Maybe the only break that we've ever really needed in our lives. But another good one, Joe Patrick. Another good one. You guys had questions. We have vague words resembling answers, probably. But we did have a lot of questions today, and they were mostly pretty good. We'll get to pretty much all of them, I think, today. Long episode, I think, as we kind of move through these. But first one, we'll start with John, who asked, how hard is it really to ensure we play everyone at least once each season? Plenty of options out there. My favorite, East-West, 2 divisions each, home away in division. I'll give MLS a pass this season, maybe. But moving forward, would you agree it's better to hashtag play everyone? And this is that question about the schedule I was talking about, where people were kind of like, oh, I hate that we don't play these Western Conference teams. And I get it to an extent, but also I really do like the exclusivity of what is happening here. I like the idea that these 2 Western Conference games we're playing this year are very, very big, important games. And I compared it to an out-of-conference game in football that's really, really big. Like, Notre Dame coming down Georgia or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It seems to have that kind of level of hype kind of attached to it, just because it is this exclusive thing. Now, do I think it's not going to be a regular occurrence? It's not going to be that. But for the moment, I think you can kind of sit back and be like, wow, we have these 2 really big events coming our way. Everyone should be back in the stadium by that point. I think by the time these games go down, we're going to have these 2 big events happening. And that's really cool to me.
Yeah, I like that. I am kind of on your side as well. And I think there's just kind of 2 kinds of people when it comes to scheduling. There's people who want it to be as fair and equal across the board as possible, which I totally understand, feeling that way about it. But I'm kind of like you. I'm more looking at the entertainment angle and the kind of, I think that it's kind of fun to have only a couple games. The reason why those games feel so big is it's because you only have 2 or 3 opportunities to really kind of prove your mettle against the other, side that you don't play as often. So I'm fine with it that way as well. I'm not really I don't have strong opinions about the schedule. I just think that it will be very hard to try to make it perfectly balanced as the league continues to grow and you get so many teams in. It just makes it hard to, you're never going to have a kind of schedule like the Premier League or something, a league that only has 20 teams where you can pretty easily play every team home and away and something like that. I know that's not what is necessarily being called for here, but I just think as the league continues to expand, I think you're going to have to try to, if you want to make it more even, you're going to need to use divisions and things like that. And I do think that would be wise for MLS to go to a division style table.
Eventually, just because of travel reasons, just because of the size of the league as it continues to grow. They say they're stopping at 30 teams. I don't think they're going to stop at 30 teams as long as the money and the fan support is there. So we'll see on that. Overall, though, like, I think that in addition to the one side of the coin, which is the exclusivity, you have the other side of the coin where you get to breed familiarity with teams like Orlando and Toronto. And I think that will be a lot of fun. I think that'll be a lot of fun. So I think both sides of the coin are pretty well represented there. It should make for a really enjoyable product. So there you go, John. There you go, John.
And the big difference is that the league champion in MLS is done by a playoff instead of a top of the standings table like you would get in Premier League. So it's not as necessary to have everything perfectly balanced. But of course, that's going to make Supporter Shield controversies.
Well, the other question about the schedule, of course, we talked about a second ago, had to do with the Open Cup and those first 3 games. At least a team news question will ask, are Atlanta's first 3 games easy enough that we should qualify for the U.S. Open Cup? Also, do we even want to qualify for the U.S. Open Cup? And I'll go ahead and say that your answer to that second question doesn't matter because Atlanta is absolutely not making the U.S. Open Cup. The year starts with, of course, Orlando. Then you face a good, bad, good Chicago team that should be pretty much improved this year to some extent anyway. That they were like XG heroes last year that didn't have the same results in the standings. And then you go to a very good New England team. So that's 2 of the top 3 teams in the East plus the potential playoff team to start the year. It's very, very unlikely Atlanta is going to make the U.S. Open Cup.
Yeah, especially when you consider these games, we've already talked about these CCL games that are just going to add more fixture congestion to a team that doesn't have the kind of rhythm and chemistry that they'll have going into the season. So I agree with you that it's going to be very difficult for them to qualify for this. But I think they should, like I always want Atlanta United to win and to qualify for things and do all that stuff. I'm definitely not in the camp of like, oh, this is not an important competition or trophy or whatever. I'm never not rooting for this team to win. I know that that's kind of controversial to say, especially in some journalism circles or whatever, but I always just want to see good soccer and I want to see a good product.
Objectivity is a lie, just so you know.
It is. It
just
totally
so you
is.
know. I have a master's degree that proves it.
Doug McIntyre, not an objective journalist. Clearly, USA
biased. I keep your expectations low for that. You would always want to see Atlanta United win a trophy. It's a good question. That's a good question. We had another schedule question as well, though. Shane asked that now that the schedule's out, what is the toughest stretch in this Atlanta United schedule? I look through, I picked this little 5-6 game stretch out. It starts on July 24th, ends on August 19th. You go Columbus, Orlando, Montreal, Columbus, LAFC, Toronto. That is a bear.
That's pretty difficult.
Even with the Montreal break in the middle, Montreal, man, they might finish last in the East, to be totally honest. Columbus, 1 or 2 on the MLS power rankings, easy. Orlando, a top 5 team in the league. Columbus again, LAFC, 1 or 2 on the power rankings. And then whatever Toronto looks like, I still don't quite know what Toronto's going to look like. No one knows what Toronto's going to look like.
Yeah.
I saw where Chris Armas today was like, man, we should really get Michael Bradley and attack more. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be fun. So
taking a page out of Klinsmann's book right there.
Exactly. But the talent's going to be there for Toronto no matter what. So that's going to be difficult. That is a tough 6 game stretch. So if they're doing pretty well by then, if they're firing all cylinders, that'll be the big barometer of kind of what this team can maybe do in a playoff scenario, I think. Yeah.
Sounds good to me. I haven't really examined the schedule that far, but that you pulled out, that stretch is I can't imagine a much more difficult stretch that a team would have. So yeah.
To add to that, the game before Columbus is, I believe it's like Cincinnati, but then before that is New England. So you throw that in there. New England is top 3 team in the East pretty easily at this point, all things considered. And then again, a lot of stuff's going to change, but that's a tough run.
I feel like it's just generally going to be a very competitive landscape in the Eastern Conference here. A lot of good
teams.
The East
is deep in a lot of weird ways, but at the same time, it feels structured. Like if you were to break the East into tiers, you would be able to kind of pick those out somewhat easily. But at the same time, there's a ton of movement potentially in the Eastern Conference. We'll talk about that more potentially with our next interview guest on the Patreon as we kind of work through that. That's the future, though. Let's keep an eye on the somewhat near present. Joel asks, if you guys are picking a starting 11 for the CCL opener, who would you pick?
Great question. How do you want to take this? Let's just start from the back, I guess, and go to the front.
Yeah, totally.
So George Bell, I think we can agree on George Bello, left back, Ronald Hernandez, right back. That's who I would pick. Maybe you want to go Brooks London for some continuity, but I mean,
are we doing who we would start and not who we think is going to start? Let's do both.
Okay,
let's do both. I would start Hernandez. I think Lennon's going to start.
Interesting. I would actually agree with both of those. Now that you say that, I do. I would want Hernandez to start. I think the center back situation is really interesting because there's really only one like locked on starter, which is obviously Miles Robinson. And so the question is who starts next to him. Oh, and obviously Braca's going to be in goalie. So who's next to Miles Robinson?
I think it's Campbell. I think
it's Campbell.
I think the indications from the scrimmages and everything like that, I mean, they do have some kind of experience together in the system at this point, and that will probably win out over whatever ball playing ability Anton Walks may have that's better than what George Campbell is bringing. It's a tough one, though. They could come out with either.
It's really tough. Yeah.
The only thing that's going to shock me is if it's like Alex DeJohn is by himself, actually. It's a back three. Surprise.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't really have a preference of who it would be, to be perfectly honest. I'm just more intrigued to see who it will be. And I guess I would say George Campbell just because that's the player that we've seen play next to Miles Robinson so far this preseason. I'm not so much a person who takes that much into account of like who's in these starting lineups, who's playing with like the first group and the second group. But I do think when you're looking at partnerships, like it is important to recognize who's playing next to the starter at center back. And George Campbell's obviously been that guy. So I'm down with George Campbell. All right. So midfield, a 3-man midfield. We'll just 3-man midfield. Santiago Sosa clearly going to be the number 5 or the defensive midfielder. I would think that Emerson Hyndman is going to start, and then Ezequiel Barco as well.
We agree.
And then, so the only kind of conversation there or debate would be whether it's going to be Hyndman or Franco Ibarra. And then the front three, I am going to go with. So I'm going to go with Marcelino Moreno on the left.
Yes.
On the right, I think it will be Jurgen Damm, but I want it to be Eric Lopez.
I think it's going to be Lopez.
Oh, you think it's going to be Lopez?
I think it's going to be Lopez. Oh, you've brainwashed me. What is this?
I'm so shocked that you would say that. Yeah. And then striker.
This is the biggest question, I think.
I think it's going to be Lisandro Lopez. That's how it feels to me.
Which, like, if you have Joseph Martinez and ball people coming on for 20 minutes into the game, there are worse things, right? But sure. I think asking him to go even 60 or 70 right now probably won't happen, all considered.
Yeah,
and Lisandro is the best option otherwise.
You never want to start a player who you're going to have to sub off at a certain point. That's always a risk. And so Joseph Martinez clearly seems like that kind of player right now. So I think it's best to bring him on as a sub.
On top of that, you think about maybe potentially the CONCACAF nature of the field they could be playing on. This is the biggest club in Costa Rica, so it may be pristine, but every now and then you get a CONCACAF field that is a little bumpy. Yeah. A little bumpy, So
he'd be locked on to play in the game. I just don't think he'll start.
Yeah, that'd be tough. Tough on the knees, for sure. So there we go. There's our starting 11 predicted. Anyway, keep an eye, of course, on the striker. Keep an eye on fullback, center back. Lots of interesting questions going forward. Yeah, no, it's exciting to even think about a starting 11 for a game like that. And of course, that starting 11 leads us to a couple of questions about who is going to be left over from last year, who's going to be one of those players who was on that team that shall not be named, essentially, is what 2020 is turning into. This leads to our question from Blue, who has taken out new guys. Which of the French starter holdovers, that's Hyndman, Damm, Lennon, etc., is going to be most integral to Heinze's system working? And why is the answer definitely Hyndman? The answer is definitely Hyndman because he might be the best ball-playing midfielder we kind of have, which isn't exciting. That's not an exciting statement that I just said, but I think it's kind of the way it is right now, especially with Ibarra still growing and learning as a 19-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say it's Hyndman, mainly just based on the position. Like, as a central midfielder, you're just playing a very crucial role in the team. You're in the middle of the field. You're going to be around the ball more, and the decisions and actions that person or that position takes are just going to be very crucial in general, as opposed to some other positions like playing on the wing and things like that. So I would say Hyndman, though I also think that Brooks Lennon, he's kind of one of my, I wouldn't say, I don't know if sleeper is the right word, but I think that he will show a lot more this year. I think that this system will really suit him a lot, as it does George Bello. I think he'll have a lot more opportunities to put in service, because last year Brooks Lennon didn't really, there was nobody to play the ball to. There was nobody, there was just not a lot going on in the attack for him to really kind of make his mark. So I'm expecting a big season out of Brooks Lennon.
Yeah, something that's worrying me right now as I'm kind of looking at the depth chart. Mo Adams out with a sports hernia for the next couple weeks at least. Probably be back later in April, I think is right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, with Hisetsu back in Brazil, the depth is very
central midfield is
very thin. You have Hyndman, you have Sosa, Ibarra, and some combination of Moreno and Barco, and that's it.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing. So there's not a whole lot of options there, which could get real interesting as we move throughout the year.
I would just add one more thing. I don't know if it's just the way he phrased this or what, but Heinze, when he was talking about Barco in his presser on Saturday, said that he was like, I think we found a position for him. He was like, he said something like that. It was like, I think we've found a position for him to be effective or something like that. And he did surprise in that one friendly that they broadcast against the Battery with Barco playing centrally. So I'm kind of curious to kind of see if he's able to have a big year this year. And he looks really fit, by the way. Ezequiel Barco does, probably as like lean as I've ever seen him.
I want to see how all of it works. I still don't know about Marcelino playing on the wing and everything like that. I kind of want to see how it all connects, and I'm still somewhat very concerned about the ball winning capabilities of a midfield that includes Ezequiel Barco and Emerson Hyndman, and it seems a little risky. And I wonder if they might skew more defensively in this first leg, but my brain is, and my heart is telling me that Heinze will say, nah, go get him and try to, play as attacking as possible. We'll see.
Yeah.
Next question comes from Soccer Star, and it's one of the French guys we didn't really mention in this question. He asked, will Jake Moraney challenge Dan for the right wing position long term? It seems Heinze really likes him out there. I haven't gotten necessarily that indication. And I think Jake plays largely on the left too. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, he played mainly on the left last year, and I'm not even sure what his dominant foot is, left or right.
Mm-hmm. But to answer the question, it's Eric Lopez, I think, actually.
Yeah, definitely, of course. I'm not as high on Jake Mulroney. I know he's had a good preseason in terms of, I think he's scored a couple goals in some of these scrimmages and contributed to some assists. He's certainly featured pretty heavily in the highlight packages that the team has put together. But I tend to think that these things are a little bit of mirages. I don't expect him to play a big role in this team this year. He is a guy who's good going one-on-one. He's quick, but it's the decision-making. It's kind of the quick fluency of thought and the ability to play in those combinations that I think Gabriel Heinze is really going to be looking for. And I just don't think that suits Jake Mulroney's strength. He's much more of a one-on-one kind of go at the fullback type of player.
We agree. The next question is about another fringe guy. Rick asks, will Hisetsu ever be a factor for the team? I want to say yes, just looking at that midfield depth, because it is so thin. He will almost have to be at some point, right? Whether that's a good or bad factor, I'm not necessarily sure, but he will have to be some kind of factor if he is indeed still necessarily going to be on the team.
Yeah, I'm not very sold on the talent that is Mateus Rossetto, but I do think, if you're right that if he is on this team, which I do think is an if right now. And by the way, this is, as it relates to the last question, I think that this international slot, I think either Jake Mulroney or Mateus Rossetto is not going to be registered with the first team coming into the season. If you just look at the international slots, unless there's a green card coming down, that would be the only thing that saves either one of those guys. Otherwise, I don't see how it happens.
And keep in mind, those are hard to get right now.
Yeah, they are. So anyway, that out of the way. Will he ever be a factor for the team? I don't think so, just because I don't think the talent's there. But if he is on the team, then he will have that opportunity at least, which is more than you can say for some people. But he hasn't proven it to me yet. I haven't seen it, so I can't say that he would be.
We know the next answer to the question will not include Mateus Rossetto based on what we just said. But John does ask, who is going to be the most improved returning player? Now, keep in mind, improved is doing a lot of work there because, like, if you say someone like Bello, right? Like, Bello's already pretty good.
Yep.
He might be improved a little bit, but I don't know. I want the full, who's getting the most separation from 2020 selves to their 2021 selves is the question.
So my answer would be Miles Robinson. And I know that he made MLS Best 11 in Frank de Boer's first year, but he was not good last year.
Yeah,
and I think that a big part of that was, one, injuries. He was not healthy pretty much all year. I think like every week, Stephen Glass was talking about bits and pieces with with Miles Robinson. And I just don't think generally the way that the team set up with them playing a very deep block, I don't think that gets the best out of Miles Robinson at all. I think that with this team playing high up the field, pressing high, I think that gets the very best out of Miles Robinson. I think he's going to be like noticeably amazing this year, and it could be good enough to like potentially get him a big move into Europe.
Every single time we talk to a player who has played with Miles, the first thing they say is he is one of, if not the best one-on-one defenders I've ever seen, right? Mm-hmm. Ever, which is like crazy considering that we're talking to like people like Parkhurst and Bobby Boswell and stuff like that. So to have that in mind and keeping in mind with what Parky was talking about, how in Tata's system there were so many one-on-ones, and thinking about the similarities with this system to that, it sets him up in a really, really big way. And I think you're right to take that jump from last year to this year. It could be really, really special. And hopefully he's staying through the summer. If that jump does happen, I would love to see a Philadelphia kind of thing where they held on to Mark McKenzie before moving him on to Genk. But they got that deal done before the end of the year. So there was kind of this idea of like, okay, this is it. Give it your all, and then we'll ship you off for hopefully maybe greener pastures in the future. Miles, if he does come good, I think he has a better skill set. I think he's more physical than McKenzie. He may command even more money and a better team, honestly, if he does make that jump this year. That is kind of an if, but I think, Joe, I think you're right. I think that could be easily the most improved guy from 2020 to 2021. Moving on, Greg. And yeah, I'm stealing yours.
Okay.
Yeah. Greg and Heath would kind of ask the same kind of question. It's about a guy we haven't really talked a whole lot about, in a position we haven't really talked a whole lot about. Greg says, meant to ask this the other week, but approximately how many opponent players does it take to dispossess Rocco? And Heath would ask, building on this, what's the deal with Rocco? Have we seen Khan or Lundgaard had all this preseason-wise Rocco getting all the reps alongside Gazan? And I want to answer that last one first, and I think it's because this guy's kind of a big deal. A little bit, anyway. It seems pretty clear like they're kind of setting him up to be the guy after Gazan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And Alec Can is a guy who's been around the league for a while, but I don't think he's like the guy you would look to be the long-term goalkeeper that follows Brad Guzan. As unfortunate as that may be for Can. And Lundgaard I actually like as well, but he's older. I want to say he's in his mid-20s already, even though he's kind of still feels young in his career, and that is still pretty young for a goalkeeper. I like Lundgaard a lot, but it does seem like this Rocco Rios Novos is going to be a guy who has the skill set that could be like a game changer at goalkeeper, especially with the way the modern game is going in terms of this distribution. It was hilarious, when Greg asked about how many players it take to dispossess him. During that Charleston Battery game, I was looking away at something. I was like looking at my phone or something, and then I turned my eyes back to the computer screen to watch the game, and it was just the goalkeeper on the ball with like three guys right around him in an immediate vicinity. But he got rid of it. But that's the kind of skill set he possesses, and it's very important.
It's a really clever investment, I think, from the front office. A position that can cost money to get a high level kind of guy in.
If you wait too long,
right, but doesn't have that much effect in MLS overall, right? So if you can get a guy in early on the cheap who's probably going to be like ceiling, like floor, average, that's a steal in MLS, right? So even if he is just kind of an average keeper going forward, getting him in early like that, getting him in for relatively cheap and setting him up for the future and having a plan, I think that's really, really smart.
Yeah, and hopefully he takes this year and he's able to play a bunch of games with Atlanta United too. He's able to really get settled. I don't know how long he's lived in America. Obviously, he's an American citizen. He was born in Los Angeles. I'm not sure like how kind of if there will be an adaptation process for him living in the United States, but it's good for him to at least have one season to settle and still feel like he has a role long term with this club.
It feels like there's been an Instagram post of him in America playing like COD with Barco for like a good few months here. So I think he's been around.
Yeah.
I think he's been around for sure, which leads to a question from Philip Jeffco, who asked, could this be the last year that we see Brad Guzan in Atlanta United uniform? I don't want to spend too much time on this. We talked about it a little bit, but Joe, any idea on Brad Guzan's contract status and maybe future with the team?
Well, his contract status, he has a contract through 2023. So he still has a couple years left. I don't know how tradable he would be, honestly. If he's got a big contract, I don't know a team that would want to add someone like that, a player like that. So I honestly don't know what the future really holds for Brad Guzan, especially beyond this year. I don't know. I wish I had a better answer.
There would have to be a really, really noticeable regression and a really quality performance from Rocco for this to really even matter this year, I think, and even into next year. I think as long as that contract is there, Brad Guzan is the guy just for numerous reasons, right? Because he is one Brad Guzan, and because of the locker room presence and because of all that kind of thing, that it's the full package for Guzan. It's still probably too much for a goalkeeper who's performed below average over the last 2 years, and it's getting progressively worse. But all those things considered, seems like he's the guy.
I hope for your sake he doesn't hear that.
He doesn't like the stats. He doesn't like the stats. Don't ask him about the stats. Greg asked, do we have adequate depth for Mikey while he's out scout jamboree this summer? Which is a great question. I was originally going to make it rapid fire. However, I think there is something to look at here, and that is the depth of this team. And kind of thinking about maybe some international competitions going on and how kind of hectic it's going to be with that, with maybe potentially Open Cup, with CCL, all that kind of thing. It's kind of interesting to take a look at the depth of the team overall. And if Mikey is gone, or if Mikey is hurt in any way, it's just George left. And we already know about how hostile some of those things are between them and the national team. It could lead to some really even more awkward situations if he were to be called in for anything going forward. Left back is interesting. Right back, you only have Lennon Hernandez. We talked about midfield. There's some spots here where things, if they went wrong, would go wrong in a hurry. And that's just kind of the way it is in MLS overall, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be very interesting to see what happens if that situation were to arise that you described. There are a couple, Frank de Boer obviously had to deal with this. He played Florentine Pogba at left back. He played Justin Miram at left back or left wing back. He just the formation to be able to accommodate for the loss he had at left back there at the time. And this team has a really good left back in its academy. I don't know if like hardship would be able, like the hardship clause would be enacted for this. I know with goalkeepers, we've seen it enacted for Atlanta United where they've been able to call up a guy like a Paul Christensen to come up, and he ended up actually getting thrown into a game after a red card. And those kinds of things. I don't know if like they would be able to do that for a left back, because normally goalkeeper is just such a specified position. That's the only thing that would allow you to call in a player that's not on the major league or the roster, the MLS roster. Because there are like Caleb Wiley is a really promising left back in the academy right now, but he's only like 16, I think, so still very young. But yeah, I don't know. I think that I think Heinze would probably just like change the shape and have to try to work around it best he can. Maybe a Jake Mulroney could be a guy who finds a spot in that kind of tweener role as a left back, left wing back type.
We could see it. There are always those worries. And like I said, that's just kind of a part of MLS. And it's that way at most positions for most teams. For Atlanta United, it's kind of not a concern at forward this year, which we've talked about before. It's not a concern at center back necessarily. I think they're more concerned about the top end than the depth. The depth seems pretty good. So those are a couple spots that are okay. The rest of them, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed, as you would be with any season. And fingers crossed that Joe Patrick can make it through this next segment. This is Rapid Fire. Joel asks, since reporters will be allowed back in the press box, do you think the Carvel machine will be operating again for Doug? The answer is only if Edgar Davids is not blocking it. Edgar, you owe me.
It's only a
Philip,
matter of time before it dies and starts leaking out of the bottom anyway. But while it's
of course,
good, we'll be using it.
we'll be using it. Philip asks, how long do you expect it will be before Joseph goes a full 90 in a game?
Great question. I'll say middle of May.
Fair enough. Todd asks, what scout badge is Mikey Ambrose currently working on? I don't know any scout badges.
Weeblo.
What? Okay.
I think that's a badge.
I think that's a thing. That's a thing. Yeah. Kojo asks, it's a cold, rainy night in Harrison, New Jersey against the New Jersey Moo Cows. It's the 87th minute of the semis of the MLS Cup playoffs. The score is tied at 1-1. Who scores the winning goal for Atlanta United to move on to the MLS Cup final?
Kevin Kratz with a free kick. Kevin Kratz is signed during the summer transfer window.
In a wheelchair. He gets
Kratz
up and
country.
out, runs into Kratz country as the final sub and nails it. Red Bulls aren't going to be in the semi. Come on now. Come on. Everhart Creative asks, in terms of the obvious Atlanta United blood sport parallels, who was our Chong Lee this year? You can kind of look at Columbus, but we won't see Columbus a ton. We won't see LAFC a ton. So I guess technically in terms of like a rivalry and like possibly maybe you almost killed my friend, you did kill my friend kind of thing, it might be Orlando City this year. Orlando's going to be good, and it's going to make those rivalry games really, really interesting when we get into Kumite. Philip asks, who do you think leads the team in goals, and who do you think leads the team in assists? I say goals is still Joseph. Assist, I'm going to go Marcelino Marino.
I will say goals, Joseph, and assists, Ezequiel Barco.
I like it. It leads into our next question from Logan, who asks, will the other boats also get unstuck in 2021? Shout out to the Ever Given.
I do. And I think that, talking about goals scored, I think Barco is not going to be too far behind Joseph. I think that the way the goals are going to be dispersed at the end of the season is going to be like lots of guys in the kind of mid-teens. Joseph,
mid-teens. Wow.
Joseph, Eric Lopez. And I think Ezequiel Barco is going to be one of those guys who scored more goals than people think.
Tony has thoughts on if Guzan will be the captain, and if not, who will it be? I think Guzan's probably the captain.
He is the captain.
Just on age. Alex Morrison asks, most handsome and well-dressed, Tata, De Boer, or Ainze? I think we could argue about handsomeness as far as De Boer or Ainze. I'm going to chalk that up to personal taste, but best dressed, it's not unfortunately, it's clearly Frank.
It's De Boer, the salmon blazer. Frank. Are you kidding me?
Oh, it was so good. He had some excellent fits, if anything. Smurfy asked, have either of you been on the Atlanta streetcar, unironically? No, I have not, but it was prominently featured in the transportation section of the video that got the North American group to win the World Cup for 2026. They said, look at our great transportation infrastructure, and no shit, showed a video of the Atlanta streetcar that no one has used in
already
the past
paying off
8 years. And that's right.
Good for something.
Oh man, Joe Patrick, man, we're close, man. We're close. Everybody hang tight. Go get your vaccine. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're 1 week away. Will we do a show before that game or not, Joe Patrick?
Probably. I don't know. Should we wait? Should we wait until after?
Tell us on Twitter.
Let us know. Let us know what you want us to do. If you want us to record on that Monday or after the game.
Yeah, we can maybe even do both if you're nice. We can figure it out. We're excited to kind of get more into our normal schedule as the weekend goes on. And I'm excited to just be in attendance for a soccer game in general. Joe, before we get out of here, your final thought. What is the one thing you were looking forward to most about being back at a soccer game in 2021?
The fans. It's got to be just seeing fans back in the stadium as well.
Just having noise again, man. Just even on TV when we've been watching some of the Olympic qualifying stuff, hearing when Mexico is playing and just hearing what like 9,000 people sounds like is like jarring. You know,
I know.
To have that noise again is going to be, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. We miss y'all. We miss y'all deeply. But we'll see you soon. Right? Bye, y'all.